Welcome to the Rainy Night Storyteller. In this quiet space, where the rain whispers like secrets in the dark, I will guide you through chilling tales of mystery and horror. Turn off the lights, settle into your favorite spot, and let the soothing sound of the rain carry you into a world of the unknown. Before we dive into tonight's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps keep the rain falling and the stories coming. Are you ready? Let's begin the tale. Arang Medan, the Malacca Strait, 1947. A sweltering humidity hung heavy in the air, clinging to the skin like a damp shroud. The sun beat down mercilessly on the calm waters, turning the sea into a shimmering sheet of molten glass. Not a breath of wind stirred, leaving the ocean eerily still. It was the kind of oppressive heat that made men sluggish and irritable, a perfect breeding ground for simmering tension and unspoken fears. The SS Arang Medan, a Dutch freighter, sliced through this oppressive stillness, its engines a dull, thrumming counterpoint to the silence of the sea. On board, the crew went about their duties with a practiced efficiency born of long days at sea. Captain van der Decken, a gruff but experienced seaman, stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had sailed these waters for many years and knew their treacherous currents and unpredictable weather patterns all too well. Yet, there was an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach, a premonition of something amiss that he couldn't quite shake off. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the deck, a sense of unease crept over the crew. The oppressive heat seemed to intensify, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. Whispers of local legends began to circulate amongst the men, tales of vengeful spirits that haunted these waters, of ghost ships that lured sailors to their doom. Old Man Jansen, the ship's cook, a man with a lifetime of seafaring tales etched on his weathered face, spoke of the Orang Bunyan, mythical beings said to inhabit the forests and seas, capable of weaving illusions and driving men mad. Just as the last vestiges of daylight faded, plunging the ship into darkness, a chilling cry shattered the uneasy quiet. SOS! SOS! The voice, crackling over the wireless, was filled with a raw terror that sent shivers down the spines of all who heard it. Captain van der Decken rushed to the radio room, his heart pounding in his chest. "This is SS Arang Medan. Do you copy?" He barked into the microphone, his voice betraying his growing anxiety. The response came back, faint and garbled, but undeniably chilling. "All officers dead. Lying in chartroom and bridge, probably whole crew dead." A string of indecipherable Morse code followed, then a final, desperate plea. "I die." The message sent a wave of icy dread through the captain. He had heard his share of distress calls, but none like this. There was something profoundly unsettling about the voice, something beyond the realm of human suffering. He immediately contacted the nearest vessels, relaying the SOS and the disturbing message. One of the ships that picked up the distress call was the Silver Star, an American merchant vessel sailing under the command of Captain Parker. A seasoned mariner with a reputation for level-headedness, even Parker felt a shiver run down his spine as he listened to the chilling message. He ordered his crew to change course and head towards the Arang Medan's last known position, a sense of foreboding growing with every passing mile. As the Silver Star approached the coordinates, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the sea in an eerie silence. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable sense of dread. Captain Parker, his instincts screaming at him to turn back, pushed aside his apprehension. He had a duty to render aid, no matter the cost. Through the swirling mist, a dark shape emerged, looming like a phantom in the gloom. It was the Arang Medan, drifting aimlessly, its silhouette a stark reminder of the chilling message that had echoed across the waves. The Silver Star pulled alongside the Arang Medan, its crew gripped by a chilling premonition. Captain Parker, his face etched with concern, assembled a boarding party, hand-picking his most trusted men for the task. First Officer Rogers, a sturdy and reliable man, led the group, armed with flashlights and a growing sense of apprehension. As they stepped onto the deck of the Aurang Medan, a wave of icy air washed over them, raising goosebumps on their skin. The ship was shrouded in an unnatural silence, broken only by the creaking of its timbers and the gentle lapping of waves against its hull. There was no sign of life, no movement, no sound of human activity. It was as if the vessel had been abandoned in haste, leaving behind an eerie tableau of frozen lives. The boarding party cautiously made their way across the deck, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The first sign that something was terribly wrong was the ship's dog, a scruffy terrier that usually greeted visitors with enthusiastic barks. It lay dead near the hatch, its body stiff, its teeth bared in a silent snarl, its eyes wide with a terror that seemed to linger even in death. As they ventured deeper into the ship, a scene of unimaginable horror unfolded before their eyes. The crew of the Aurang Medan lay scattered across the decks, in the cabins, on the bridge, all dead. But it wasn't the mere fact of their deaths that chilled the blood of the Silver Star's crew. It was the grotesque manner in which they had perished. Their faces were contorted in masks of fear, their eyes wide open, staring blankly into the void, their mouths agape as if in a silent scream. Their bodies were rigid, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, frozen in the throes of some unseen agony. There were no signs of wounds, no evidence of struggle or violence. It was as if some unseen force had extinguished their lives in an instant, leaving behind a horrifying tableau of death. First Officer Rogers, a hardened sailor who had witnessed his share of tragedies at sea, felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. He had seen men die in storms, in battles, in accidents, but he had never encountered anything like this. The sheer terror etched on the faces of the dead, the palpable sense of dread that permeated the air, sent shivers down his spine. The men from the Silver Star moved through the ship like ghosts, their footsteps echoing eerily in the oppressive silence. They checked the cabins, the mess hall, the engine room. Everywhere they found the same horrifying scene. The captain, slumped over his charts in the chart room, his face frozen in a grimace of terror. The radio operator, his hands still clutching the telegraph key, his eyes wide with a fear that seemed to reach beyond the grave. Even the ship's cat, a ginger tabby, lay dead, its fur on end, its claws extended as if in a final desperate struggle. The air grew thick with a strange, metallic odor, and a faint humming sound seemed to emanate from the depths of the ship. The crew of the Silver Star, their nerves stretched to the breaking point, felt an overwhelming urge to flee this floating tomb, to escape the unseen horror that had claimed the lives of the Aurang Medan's crew. But Captain Parker, despite his own growing fear, insisted on a thorough search. He was determined to find some clue, some explanation for this inexplicable tragedy. He ordered his men to examine the ship's logbook, the cargo manifest, anything that might shed light on the mystery. As they delved deeper into the ship's records, a growing sense of unease settled over them. The logbook contained entries that were bizarre and unsettling, hinting at strange occurrences on board, of unexplained phenomena and growing fear amongst the crew. The cargo manifest listed mundane items, nothing that could account for the horrific fate that had befallen the ship. Just as they were about to abandon their search, one of the crewmen stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the captain's cabin. Inside, they found a small wooden box, intricately carved with strange symbols. As they opened the box, a wave of icy air swept through the cabin, extinguishing their lamps and plunging them into darkness. A guttural growl echoed through the ship, and the men felt an unseen presence close in on them, its malevolence palpable in the suffocating darkness. The sudden darkness, the guttural growl, and the palpable sense of an unseen presence sent a surge of primal fear through the men. They scrambled back, their hearts pounding in their chests, their hands groping for their flashlights. As the flickering beams of light pierced the darkness, they saw it, a swirling mist, a spectral apparition that seemed to coalesce in the center of the cabin. its form shifting and undulating like flames in a breeze. The men recoiled in horror, their breaths catching in their throats. They had stumbled upon something ancient and evil, something that defied rational explanation. The growl intensified, morphing into a low, guttural chant that seemed to resonate from the very walls of the ship. The temperature plummeted, and a wave of icy dread washed over them. "What in God's name is that?" One of the men stammered, his voice trembling with fear. "I don't know," First Officer Rogers whispered, his eyes fixed on the spectral figure. "But we need to get out of here. Now." They scrambled out of the cabin, their flashlights dancing wildly in the darkness, their footsteps echoing through the silent ship. As they fled, they heard the chanting grow louder, closer, as if the unseen entity was pursuing them. The crew raced back to the deck, their lungs burning, their minds reeling with fear. They could feel the presence of the entity all around them, its malevolence pressing down on them like a suffocating weight. The once familiar ship now felt alien and hostile, a prison from which they desperately needed to escape. As they reached the deck, they were met with a sight that made their blood run cold. The fog had thickened, swirling around the ship like a shroud, obscuring the silver star from view. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur, and a low humming sound, like the chanting from the cabin, seemed to emanate from the depths of the sea. "We're trapped," one of the men cried, his voice filled with despair. Captain Parker, his face grim, drew his pistol. "We're not giving up yet," he growled. "We'll fight our way out of this." But even as he spoke, he knew the odds were stacked against them. They were facing an unseen enemy, a force beyond their comprehension. The ship itself seemed to be working against them, its corridors twisting and turning, its shadows concealing unseen dangers. As they made their way towards the gangplank, a series of explosions erupted from the depths of the ship, sending shockwaves through the deck. The Aurang Medan lurched violently, its timbers groaning under the strain. "She's going to blow," Rogers shouted, his voice barely audible above the roar of the flames. "We need to get off this ship now." The crew scrambled across the deck, dodging falling debris and leaping over gaping holes in the deck. The flames spread rapidly, engulfing the ship in a fiery inferno. The air grew thick with smoke, making it difficult to breathe. Captain Parker, his eyes stinging from the smoke, reached the railing and looked back at the burning ship. He saw the spectral figure standing on the bridge, its form silhouetted against the flames, its arms raised in triumph. A wave of despair washed over him. They had failed. The Aurang Medan had claimed another victim. With a heavy heart, he jumped onto the gangplank and slid down to the waiting arms of the Silver Star's crew. As they pulled away from the burning ship, they could hear the screams of the damned echoing across the water. The Aurang Medan, engulfed in flames, slowly sank beneath the waves, taking its secrets and its victims with it. The Silver Star limped back to port, its crew shaken and traumatized by their encounter with the Aurang Medan. Captain Parker, haunted by the image of the burning ship and the spectral figure on the bridge, submitted his report detailing the horrific events he and his men had witnessed. His account was met with skepticism and disbelief. Many dismissed it as a tall tale, a product of overactive imaginations fueled by the oppressive heat and the superstitious whispers of the sea. But there were those who listened, who recognized the ring of truth in Captain Parker's words. News of the Aurang Medan spread through the maritime community, whispered in hushed tones in taverns and dockyards, becoming a chilling legend passed down from one generation of sailors to the next. Theories abounded, each more outlandish than the last. Some spoke of a rogue wave, a freak occurrence that had capsized the ship and drowned the crew. Others whispered of pirates, of mutiny, of a clandestine cargo that had turned deadly. But none of these explanations could account for the sheer terror etched on the faces of the dead, the unnatural positions of their bodies, the chilling messages that had crackled over the wireless. The more superstitious among the sailors spoke of ancient curses, of vengeful spirits that haunted these waters, of sea demons that lured unsuspecting vessels to their doom. They pointed to the name of the ship itself, Arang Medan, which in Malay translates to Man of Medan. Medan, a port city on the island of Sumatra, was known for its rich folklore and its association with the supernatural. Could the ship's name have been a harbinger of its fate? Others, more scientifically inclined, speculated about the possibility of a natural phenomenon, a release of methane gas from the seabed that had suffocated the crew and caused the ship to explode. But this theory failed to explain the strange occurrences reported by the Silver Star's crew: the spectral figure, the guttural chanting, the palpable sense of evil. In the end, the mystery of the Aurang Medan remained unsolved. The ship, along with its secrets, lay buried beneath the waves, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that lurk beneath the surface of our world. The story of the Aurang Medan became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning to those who dared to venture into the treacherous waters of the Malacca Strait, a testament to the enduring power of fear and the mysteries that lie hidden in the depths of the ocean. Years later, a young sailor named Ben, newly recruited to the crew of a freighter bound for the Malacca Strait, heard the tale of the Aurang Medan. He was skeptical at first, dismissing it as an old wives' tale. But as the ship neared the area where the Aurang Medan was said to have sunk, a strange feeling of unease crept over him. One night, as he stood watch on deck, he saw it, a faint glow in the distance, a ghostly apparition of a ship, its sails billowing in the wind. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was imagining things, but the image remained. He called out to his fellow crew members, but they saw nothing. As he watched, the ghostly ship drew closer, its outline becoming clearer. He could see figures on deck, their faces contorted in terror, their arms outstretched in a silent plea for help. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the ship vanished, leaving behind only the dark, empty sea. Ben never spoke of what he saw that night, fearing ridicule and disbelief, but he knew, deep in his heart, that the legend of the Aurang Medan was true. He knew that somewhere, beneath the waves, the ship and its crew still sailed, trapped in an eternal nightmare, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. The Somerton Cipher. The sun, a drowsy orange orb, was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the smooth expanse of Somerton Beach. It was December 1st, 1948, and a gentle sea breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed across the sand. The tranquility of the early morning was shattered when John Lyons and his wife, out for their customary stroll, stumbled upon a sight that would forever be etched into the annals of Australian mystery. A man's body lay sprawled on the sand, seemingly lifeless. He was dressed impeccably in a suit and tie, his polished shoes incongruous with the beach setting. He lay on his back, one arm flung out as if reaching for something lost in the vastness of the sky. His face, pale and serene, held no trace of pain or struggle. It was as if he had simply fallen asleep, lulled by the rhythm of the waves. But there was an undeniable chill in the air, a sense of wrongness that clung to the scene like a shroud. The Lions, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, rushed to the nearby police station. Detective Sergeant Lynn Brown, a seasoned officer with a reputation for his methodical approach, was assigned to the case. He surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, noting the lack of any obvious signs of foul play. No footprints marred the sand around the body, no weapon lay discarded nearby. It was as if the man had materialized from thin air. The body was transported to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, where a thorough examination revealed no cause of death. The man's fingerprints were taken, but they yielded no matches in any database. He carried no identification, no wallet, no personal effects that could shed light on his identity. The only clue, a single chilling detail, was a tiny piece of paper found tucked deep within a hidden fob pocket in his trousers. On it, printed in faint ink, were two words, Tamam Shud. The words, Persian for ended or finished, sent a shiver down Detective Brown's spine. They were torn from the final page of a rare edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of verses by the 11th century Persian poet. The discovery of the scrap only deepened the mystery. Who was this man? What was the meaning of the cryptic message? And how did he die? The case quickly captured the imagination of the public, fueled by the newspapers that sensationalized every detail. The unknown man became known as the Somerton Man, or the Tamamshud case, his enigmatic demise shrouded in speculation and intrigue. Whispers of espionage, secret societies, and even supernatural forces filled the air, adding to the growing sense of unease. Detective Brown, a man of logic and reason, tried to dismiss the more outlandish theories. Yet, even he couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something deeply unsettling about the case, something that defied rational explanation. As the investigation progressed, he would uncover a series of strange clues, each more baffling than the last, leading him down a twisted path into a labyrinth of secrets and lies. The body on Somerton Beach was just the beginning, the first piece in a puzzle that would challenge his beliefs and push him to the very limits of his sanity. Days turned into weeks, and the Somerton Man remained an enigma. Detective Brown, haunted by the case, found himself working late into the night, poring over every detail, every clue, every dead end. The lack of progress gnawed at him, fueling his determination to uncover the truth. One evening, as he sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the faded photograph of the deceased, a thought struck him. The clothes. The man's attire was immaculate, almost too perfect. It was as if he had dressed with deliberate care, as if for a specific occasion. Brown decided to revisit the evidence, examining each garment meticulously. He found no labels, no identifying marks, but as he ran his fingers along the lining of the coat, he felt something small and hard. He carefully extracted the object, a tiny, hidden pocket sewn into the fabric. Inside, he found a scrap of paper, barely larger than a postage stamp. On it, printed in the same faint ink as the Tamamshud note, was a series of letters. Brown stared at the jumble of letters, his mind racing. Was it a code? A cipher? A message from beyond the grave? He consulted with cryptographers, linguists, and even mathematicians, but none could decipher the meaning of the strange sequence. The code, like the man himself, remained stubbornly silent. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Tamamshud note led to a surprising discovery. A man came forward, claiming to have found a copy of the Rubaiyat discarded in his car, just days after the body was found. The book, a rare first edition, was missing its final page, the one containing the phrase Tamamshud. On the back cover, written in faint pencil, was a series of seemingly random letters, similar to the code found in the coat pocket. Ragobab, Mliawi. The letters were almost identical, with only the first letter differing. Could this be another clue? Another piece of the puzzle? Brown examined the book carefully, searching for any other markings or hidden messages. He found nothing, but as he flipped through the pages, he noticed something odd. Several lines of verse were underlined, seemingly at random. He copied them down, his intuition telling him they held some significance. Indeed, repentance oft before. I swore, but was I sober when I swore? And then came spring and rose in hand. My threadbare penitence a piece tore. The lines, filled with regret and longing, seemed to hint at a troubled soul, a life filled with secrets and hidden desires. Was this the Somerton Man's story, his final message to the world? Or was it just a cruel coincidence, a random selection of verses with no meaning at all? As the investigation continued, more strange details emerged. The Somerton Man's suitcase, found abandoned at the Adelaide railway station, contained a variety of items, including a threadbare tie with the label removed, a pair of scissors with sharpened points, and a stenciling brush. None of these items seemed particularly unusual, but their presence added to the growing sense of mystery surrounding the case. The phone number found in the back of the Rubaiyat belonged to a young nurse named Jessica Thompson, who lived just a few blocks from where the body was found. When questioned by the police, she appeared nervous and evasive, claiming not to know the Somerton man or anything about the case. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. The case of the Somerton man had become a tangled web of clues, codes, and dead ends. Each new discovery seemed to raise more questions than it answered, pushing Detective Brown further into a maze of uncertainty. The truth, elusive and shadowy, remained just out of reach, beckoning him forward into the unknown. The Somerton man's case continued to baffle authorities, his identity and cause of death remaining frustratingly elusive. Detective Brown, consumed by the mystery, began to experience unsettling dreams. Vivid images of the man on the beach, the cryptic note, and the strange code danced before his eyes, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Brown sought out Professor James Ellis, a renowned historian with a keen interest in ancient languages and forgotten lore. He showed the professor the coded message and the underlined verses from the Rubaiyat. Ellis, intrigued by the challenge, immersed himself in the texts, poring over ancient Persian manuscripts and deciphering arcane symbols. Weeks later, the professor emerged from his research with a startling theory. The code, he believed, was not a cipher in the conventional sense, but rather a series of clues leading to a hidden message embedded within the verses themselves. The underlined passages, when read in a specific order determined by the code, formed a chilling narrative. The story spoke of a man, a spy perhaps, who had infiltrated a secret society known as the Keepers. This organization, steeped in ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge, sought to control the world through manipulation and deceit. The man, torn between his loyalty to his mission and his growing conscience, had attempted to expose the Keepers, but his plans were discovered. He was hunted, pursued by ruthless agents who would stop at nothing to silence him. The verses hinted at a desperate escape, a journey across continents, and a final confrontation on Somerton Beach. The man, poisoned by his enemies, had managed to leave behind a series of clues, hoping that someone would one day decipher his message and bring the Keepers to justice. Brown, shaken by the professor's revelations, began to see the case in a new light. The Somerton man was not just a nameless victim. He was a pawn in a dangerous game, a casualty in a secret war that had been raging for centuries. The Keepers, if they truly existed, were a shadowy force, their influence stretching far beyond the shores of Australia. As Brown delved deeper into the case, he began to uncover disturbing connections. The nurse, Jessica Thompson, was linked to a prominent businessman with rumored ties to organized crime. The businessman, in turn, had connections to a shadowy group of intellectuals and artists who met regularly in a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Adelaide. This group, known as the Circle, was rumored to be involved in occult practices and esoteric rituals. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, revealing a disturbing picture. The Somerton man, it seemed, had stumbled upon a dangerous secret, a secret that powerful people were willing to kill to protect. Brown, now more determined than ever to solve the case, found himself drawn into a world of intrigue, conspiracy, and hidden agendas. He knew that he was treading on dangerous ground, but he could not turn back. The Somerton man deserved justice, and Brown was the only one who could deliver it. But as he ventured further into the heart of the mystery, he realized that the truth was more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Detective Brown intensified his investigation, focusing on the Circle and its connection to the Somerton man. He discovered that the group was led by a charismatic figure known only as the Shepherd, a man shrouded in mystery and rumored to possess immense wealth and influence. The Shepherd, it was said, had a fascination with ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge, and he believed that the Circle was destined to usher in a new era of enlightenment. Brown, disguised as an interested scholar, infiltrated one of the Circle's gatherings. The atmosphere was charged with an eerie energy, a mixture of intellectual curiosity and dark fascination. The members, a diverse group of artists, academics, and socialites, spoke in hushed tones about arcane philosophies and hidden truths. The shepherd, a tall, imposing figure with piercing blue eyes, held court, his words weaving a spellbinding tapestry of mystery and intrigue. As Brown listened, he realized that the circle was more than just a group of eccentric intellectuals. It was a cult devoted to the worship of ancient deities and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. The shepherd, he suspected, was using the group to further his own twisted agenda, an agenda that involved manipulating world events and controlling the minds of the masses. Brown, sensing that he was close to the truth, decided to confront Jessica Thompson, the nurse whose phone number had been found in the Somerton man's book. He showed her the coded message and the underlined verses, explaining their significance. Jessica, her eyes wide with fear, confessed that she had been a member of the circle, but had grown disillusioned with their practices. She had met the Somerton man, whose real name was Alexander, at one of the gatherings, and they had fallen in love. Alexander, she revealed, was a former intelligence agent who had infiltrated the circle to expose their secrets. He had discovered that the shepherd was planning to unleash a deadly virus designed to wipe out a significant portion of the world's population, leaving only the chosen few to inherit the earth. Alexander had tried to stop him, but he was betrayed and murdered. Jessica, fearing for her own life, had fled, leaving behind her phone number as a desperate cry for help. Brown, now convinced that the shepherd was responsible for Alexander's death, vowed to bring him to justice. But the shepherd, anticipating Brown's move, had vanished, leaving behind no trace. Brown, frustrated and defeated, returned to Somerton Beach, where it all began. As he stood on the sand, gazing out at the endless ocean, he felt a profound sense of loss. Alexander, the Somerton man, was gone. His identity finally revealed, but his story was far from over. The Keepers, the shadowy organization that Alexander had tried to expose, were still out there, their influence growing stronger with each passing day. Brown knew that he had to continue the fight, to uncover their secrets and bring them to justice. He owed it to Alexander, to Jessica, and to the world. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something strange. A single figure stood at the edge of the water, silhouetted against the setting sun. The figure was tall and imposing, with a familiar air of authority. Brown's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the man. It was the shepherd. The shepherd turned, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Brown's. A chilling smile spread across his face as he spoke. His voice carried on the wind. "You have done well, detective," he said. "You have uncovered many secrets, but the game is far from over. The Keepers are eternal. We will never be defeated." With that, he turned and walked into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves. Brown, stunned and speechless, watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the beach. He knew that the battle had just begun. The Somerton man's case was closed, but the war against the Keepers had only just begun. The whispers of Cannock Chase. The ancient woodland of Cannock Chase sprawled across the heart of Staffordshire, England, a tapestry of emerald green and dusky brown woven with secrets and shadows. Its beauty was undeniable, a haven for hikers and nature enthusiasts, yet an undercurrent of unease ran beneath its picturesque facade. For centuries, whispers of strange occurrences and eerie sightings had clung to the forest like morning mist. Locals spoke of shadowy figures flitting between the trees, of disembodied voices carried on the wind, and a pervasive sense of being watched that sent shivers down the spine. The most chilling of these tales centered around the phenomenon of the black-eyed children. These spectral figures, often described as pale-skinned youths with eyes as dark as the abyss, were said to roam the forest, their presence leaving a trail of icy dread. Some believed them to be the spirits of children lost in the woods, while others whispered of a more sinister origin, their eyes windows to a malevolent realm. Drawn by the allure of the unknown and a thirst for adventure, a group of 4 American friends, Mark, Emily, Chris, and Jessica, embarked on a journey to Cannock Chase. Mark, the leader of the pack, was a skeptic with a penchant for debunking the supernatural. Emily, the artist, possessed a sensitive soul and an openness to the unseen. Chris, the jokester, used humor to mask his underlying anxieties. And Jessica, the pragmatist, sought logical explanations for even the strangest phenomena. Their journey began with a visit to the local pub, the Crooked Billet, its timbered walls and crackling fireplace exuding an old-world charm. Over pints of ale and hearty pub fare, they engaged in conversation with the locals, eager to glean insights into the legends of Cannock Chase. I, the black-eyed children, a grizzled old man with a weathered face muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. They say they're the souls of those poor miners who perished in the pits, their eyes darkened by the cold dust and despair. A young woman with fiery red hair chimed in, her tone laced with a hint of fear. My grandmother used to tell stories of a ghostly woman in white who wanders the forest, weeping for her lost child. They say she lures travelers deeper into the woods, never to be seen again. Mark scoffed at the tales, dismissing them as folklore and superstition. Come on, guys, he said, his voice brimming with confidence. These are just stories to scare children. There's no such thing as ghosts or black-eyed kids. Emily, however, felt a prickle of unease, a sense that something ancient and unsettling lurked beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic landscape. The locals' conviction, the fear in their eyes, spoke of a truth that transcended mere storytelling. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the group set out on their first exploration of Cannock Chase. Armed with flashlights and a healthy dose of skepticism, they ventured into the heart of the woods, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound that broke the stillness. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew heavy with an unseen weight, and an unsettling silence descended upon them. The trees, their branches gnarled and twisted, seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers, their silhouettes dancing menacingly in the fading light. Do you guys feel that? Emily whispered, her voice trembling. It's like we're being watched. Chris forced a chuckle, his attempt at bravado failing to mask the tremor in his voice. Yeah, right, Em. We're being watched by a family of squirrels preparing for their winter hibernation. But even Chris couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The forest had become a labyrinth of shadows, and every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through their veins. As darkness enveloped the woods, the group stumbled upon an old, abandoned mine shaft, its entrance shrouded in overgrown vines and moss. A sense of foreboding washed over them, as if the very air around the shaft was imbued with a lingering sense of tragedy. Maybe we should turn back, Jessica suggested, her voice unusually hesitant. This place gives me the creeps. Mark, however, was undeterred. Nonsense, he declared. This is where the real mystery lies. Let's see what's down there. Ignoring the protests of his friends, Mark pushed aside the vines and peered into the darkness, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. A cold draft emanated from the shaft, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. Hello? Mark called out, his voice echoing into the abyss. Is anyone down there? The only response was the echo of his own voice, and a sudden gust of wind that sent a shiver down their spines. As they stood at the precipice of the unknown, a sense of dread settled upon them, a premonition that their adventure was about to take a sinister turn. The chilling air wafting from the mine shaft seemed to whisper warnings, yet Mark's determination to uncover the truth overrode any sense of caution. He switched on his headlamp, the powerful beam cutting through the oppressive darkness that clung to the crumbling walls of the shaft like cobwebs. Stay close, he instructed, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. And be careful where you step. One by one, they descended into the unknown. The air grew colder and damper with each step, the only sounds their own breathing and the occasional scrabble of loose rocks underfoot. The oppressive silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the cracks in the aged stone. Emily, always the most sensitive of the group, felt a growing sense of unease. The darkness seemed to press in on her, suffocating her with its weight. She imagined the miners who had toiled in this very shaft, their lives consumed by the darkness, their lungs choked with coal dust. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a feeling that they were not alone in this forgotten corner of the world. Chris, usually the life of the party, was uncharacteristically quiet. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously in the shadows cast by their headlamps. The jokes he usually cracked to alleviate tension died in his throat, replaced by a nervous tremor that he couldn't quite control. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, tried to rationalize their fear. "It's just an old mine shaft," she said, her voice a little too loud in the oppressive silence. "Probably hasn't been used in decades. There's nothing to be afraid of." But even as she spoke, her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. The darkness was too deep, the silence too profound, the air too thick with unseen presence. As they ventured deeper into the mine, the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber. Their headlamps struggled to penetrate the gloom, revealing only glimpses of rusted machinery, crumbling support beams, and piles of debris that spoke of a bygone era. Suddenly, a flicker of movement at the edge of their light caught Emily's eye. A figure, tall and gaunt, materialized from the shadows, its form indistinct in the dim light. It stood motionless, its presence exuding an aura of menace that sent a wave of terror through the group. "Who's there?" Mark challenged, his voice betraying a hint of fear. The figure remained silent, its form shifting and wavering in the darkness like a phantom. Then, as their lights focused on its face, they saw its eyes, two black pits devoid of light, staring at them with an intensity that chilled them to the bone. A collective gasp escaped the group as they recognized the figure from the local legends. It was one of the black-eyed children. The child, if it could be called that, tilted its head, its gaze fixed on them with an unsettling curiosity. Then, in a voice that seemed to emanate from the depths of the earth, it spoke. "Why have you disturbed our rest?" The sound of its voice, devoid of any warmth or emotion, sent shivers down their spines. It was a voice that belonged to another realm, a voice that spoke of ancient sorrow and unending darkness. Panic seized the group. Mark, his skepticism shattered, stumbled backward, tripping over a loose rock. His headlamp clattered to the ground, plunging them into near darkness. "Run!" he yelled, scrambling to his feet. They turned and fled, their fear propelling them through the narrow tunnels, the echoes of their panicked breaths mingling with the drip, drip, drip of water. They didn't look back, didn't dare to see if the black-eyed child was pursuing them. The only thought that consumed them was escape. As they scrambled back towards the entrance of the mine, a new sound reached their ears, a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the very earth itself. It was a sound of primal rage, a sound that spoke of a power far older and more sinister than they could have ever imagined. The growl echoed through the mine, a terrifying symphony of rage and hunger. It spurred them onward, their fear amplified by the unknown horror that lurked behind them. They scrambled over fallen rocks, squeezed through narrow crevices, and navigated treacherous drops, their bodies driven by pure adrenaline. Emily, despite her fear, couldn't help but notice the change in the atmosphere. The air grew heavier, thick with a palpable sense of dread. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, as if alive with unseen entities. The temperature plummeted, and a bone-chilling cold seeped into their very marrow. Chris, his bravado completely shattered, was now openly sobbing, his cries echoing through the tunnels. He stumbled and fell, his hands scraping against the rough stone. Jessica, ever the practical one, helped him up, her own fear masked by a veneer of determination. "We can't give up now," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "We have to keep going." Mark, his initial skepticism replaced by a primal fear, led the way, his flashlight beam dancing erratically in the darkness. He could hear the growl growing louder, closer, as if the creature was gaining on them. They finally emerged from the mine shaft, blinking against the sudden onslaught of moonlight. They collapsed onto the soft earth, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and terror. But their ordeal was far from over. As they looked back at the mine shaft, they saw a figure emerge from the darkness. It was the black-eyed child, its eyes glowing with an eerie luminescence in the moonlight. It stood at the entrance, its form silhouetted against the night sky, its presence radiating an aura of malevolence that chilled them to the core. And then it began to move. It glided towards them, its movements unnervingly fluid, its feet seemingly not touching the ground. The growl emanated from its throat, a guttural sound that vibrated through the air, filling them with a primal fear that transcended rational thought. They scrambled to their feet, their bodies screaming in protest, and ran. They ran through the forest, their lungs burning, their legs aching, the sound of the growl echoing behind them. They crashed through undergrowth, tripped over roots, and scrambled over fallen logs, their only thought to escape the horror that pursued them. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them, the trees reaching out with their gnarled branches, the undergrowth snagging at their clothes, the darkness concealing unseen obstacles. The moon, obscured by clouds, offered little illumination, plunging them into a world of shadows and fear. They could hear the child's laughter now, a high-pitched, chilling sound that echoed through the trees, mocking their desperate flight. It was a sound that spoke of a cruel amusement, a sadistic pleasure in their terror. The chase seemed to stretch on for an eternity, each step a battle against exhaustion and terror. The forest floor, uneven and treacherous, became a blur beneath their feet. Branches whipped at their faces, leaving stinging welts. Thorns tore at their clothes, leaving them ragged and bloodied. Emily, her lungs burning, her legs screaming in protest, stumbled and fell. She cried out in pain as her knee struck a sharp rock, the skin tearing open. "Emily," Jessica cried, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" I think so," Emily gasped, struggling to rise. "But I can't run anymore." Chris, his face pale with exhaustion and fear, knelt beside her. "We have to keep going," he pleaded. "It's getting closer." The growl was indeed growing louder, closer. They could hear the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, as the creature pursued them through the undergrowth. "We can't leave her," Jessica said, her voice firm. "We have to carry her." Together, they hoisted Emily onto Chris's back, her arms wrapped around his neck. He staggered under her weight, but with Jessica's help, he managed to stay upright. They continued their flight, their pace slowed by Emily's injury, the creature's growl ever closer. The forest seemed to close in on them, the trees looming like menacing giants, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the moonlight. Suddenly, they burst out of the dense undergrowth into a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient oak tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal arms. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows on the ground. And there, standing beneath the oak tree, was the black-eyed child. It stood motionless, its eyes glowing with an unholy light, its presence radiating an aura of power that seemed to drain the life from the very air. It was no longer the child they had seen in the mine. It had grown taller, its form more defined, its features more menacing. The growl emanated from its throat, a deep, resonant sound that shook the ground beneath their feet. It raised its hand, its long, slender fingers beckoning them forward. "Come," it said, its voice echoing through the clearing. "Come to me." They stood frozen, paralyzed by fear, their minds reeling from the horror of their situation. They knew they had no chance of escape, no hope of survival. Mark, his voice a mere whisper, spoke the question that hung in the air. What do you want?" The black-eyed child smiled, a chilling, predatory smile that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "I want to play," it said. A heavy silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the frantic beating of their hearts. The black-eyed child stood before them, a figure of otherworldly dread, its eyes burning with an unholy light. Its words, "I want to play," echoed in their minds, a chilling invitation to a game with unimaginable stakes. Emily, weakened by her injury and overwhelmed by fear, felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She swayed, her vision blurring, and would have collapsed had Jessica not caught her. "Stay strong, Em," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "We'll get through this." But even as she spoke, Jessica knew the odds were stacked against them. They were trapped, cornered by a creature of immense power, its intentions shrouded in darkness. Mark, his mind racing, desperately sought a way out. He glanced around the clearing, searching for any avenue of escape, any weapon to defend themselves. But there was nothing, only the ancient oak tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers, and the black-eyed child, its presence dominating the clearing. "What kind of game?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. The black-eyed child smiled, a chilling, predatory smile that sent shivers down their spines. "A game of survival," it said, its voice echoing through the clearing. "A game where only the strongest survive." And with those words, the games began. The black-eyed child raised its hand, and the clearing was plunged into darkness. A cold wind swept through the trees, and the temperature plummeted. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread. Then, the shadows came alive. They writhed and twisted, taking on grotesque shapes. They slithered across the ground, climbed the trees, and swooped through the air, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They were the creatures of the night, the denizens of the darkness, and they had come to play. The group huddled together, their backs against the oak tree, their weapons raised. They fought with desperation, their fear fueling their adrenaline. Mark swung his flashlight like a club, smashing it against the shadowy figures that lunged at him. Chris, armed with a broken branch, fought with a ferocity born of despair. Jessica, her eyes blazing with defiance, kicked and scratched at the creatures that swarmed around her. But they were outnumbered, outmatched. The shadows were relentless, their attacks coming from all sides. One by one, the group fell, their bodies succumbing to exhaustion and fear. Chris was the first to go, his strength finally failing him. He stumbled and fell, his cries echoing through the clearing as the shadows engulfed him. Jessica fought on, her determination fueled by her love for Emily. She shielded Emily with her own body, taking the brunt of the attacks. But even her strength had its limits. She collapsed, her body riddled with wounds, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Emily, her eyes filled with tears, watched helplessly as her friends were consumed by the darkness. She knew her time was coming, that she would soon join them in the abyss. But then, something unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows, a figure of light and hope. It was a woman, tall and beautiful, her eyes shining with a gentle radiance. She moved with grace and power, her presence radiating an aura of peace that calmed the storm within Emily's heart. The woman raised her hand, and the shadows retreated. The creatures of the night cowered before her, their malevolence fading in the presence of her light. "Who are you?" Emily whispered, her voice filled with awe. The woman smiled, a warm, comforting smile that filled Emily with a sense of peace she had never known before. "I am the guardian of this forest," she said, her voice soft as a whisper, "and I have come to help you." The woman's presence was like a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness, a soothing balm on their wounded souls. The shadows that had moments before threatened to consume them now recoiled, their malevolence quelled by her power. Emily, weak and injured, felt a surge of hope course through her. She looked at the woman, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for saving us." The woman smiled, her eyes filled with a warmth that belied the chilling surroundings. "You are welcome, child," she said, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "But our trials are not yet over." She turned her gaze towards the black-eyed child, who now stood motionless, its eyes narrowed, its form radiating an aura of frustration. "You have no power here, creature of darkness," the woman said, her voice ringing with authority. "This forest is under my protection, and you will not harm these children." The black-eyed child snarled, its eyes blazing with defiance. "You cannot stop me," it hissed. "I am the darkness, the fear, the despair. I am the embodiment of all that is evil, and I will not be denied." The woman's expression hardened. "Then you will face my wrath," she said, her voice echoing through the clearing. She raised her hands, and the forest around them came alive. The trees swayed and groaned, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with energy. The black-eyed child, sensing the power arrayed against it, let out a roar of rage. It lunged at the woman, its claws outstretched, its eyes burning with hatred. But the woman was ready. She moved with a speed that defied human comprehension, her form a blur of motion. She dodged the black-eyed child's attack and countered with a swiftness that sent the creature reeling. The battle raged, a clash of light and darkness, good and evil. The woman fought with the power of the forest itself, her every movement imbued with the strength of the ancient trees, the swiftness of the wind, the ferocity of the wild animals. The black-eyed child, despite its malevolence, was no match for her. It was driven back, its attacks growing weaker, its form flickering and fading. Finally, with a cry of despair, the black-eyed child vanished, its presence dissipating like smoke on the wind. The shadows retreated, and the forest fell silent. The woman turned towards the group, her eyes filled with compassion. "You are safe now, children," she said. "The darkness has been vanquished, and you are free to go." Emily, her heart filled with gratitude, struggled to her feet. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving us." The woman smiled. "It was my pleasure, child," she said. "Now go, and may the light guide your path." With a final wave of her hand, the woman vanished, leaving the group alone in the clearing. They looked around, their eyes wide with wonder, their hearts filled with a mixture of awe and relief. They had faced the darkness, and they had survived. They had witnessed the power of good, and they had been touched by its grace. They would never forget their encounter in Cannock Chase, the night they played the black-eyed child's game and lived to tell the tale. The silence that followed the woman's departure was profound, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the chirping of crickets. The group stood in the clearing, bathed in the soft moonlight, their bodies weary, their minds reeling from the events of the night. Emily, leaning heavily on Jessica, felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Her injured knee throbbed, a dull ache that mirrored the emotional turmoil within her. She looked at her friends, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and relief, and a wave of gratitude washed over her. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged, battered but unbroken. "It's over," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're safe now." Jessica, her arm around Emily's waist, nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "We are," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're alive." Chris, still pale and shaken, sank to the ground, his legs giving way beneath him. He buried his face in his hands, his body racked with sobs. The events of the night had stripped away his bravado, revealing the vulnerability that lay beneath. Mark, his skepticism shattered, stared at the spot where the woman had stood, his mind struggling to comprehend the reality of what he had witnessed. He had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to explain away the supernatural. But the events of this night had challenged his beliefs, forcing him to confront the existence of forces beyond his understanding. They sat in silence for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts, processing the events of the night. The encounter with the black-eyed child, the terrifying chase, the appearance of the guardian, the battle between light and darkness. It was a story that would forever be etched in their memories. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of pink and gold, they finally rose to their feet. They were battered and bruised, their clothes torn and dirty, but they were alive. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, their bonds of friendship strengthened by their shared ordeal. They made their way out of the forest, their steps slow and deliberate, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. But the forest was silent now, the shadows gone. The creatures of the night retreated to their hidden lairs. They emerged from the woods and onto the road, where they were greeted by the sight of a small village, its houses bathed in the warm glow of the morning sun. They walked towards the village, their hearts filled with a sense of gratitude for their survival. They found a small inn, its windows glowing with welcoming light, and collapsed onto the soft beds, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. They slept for a long time, their dreams filled with images of the forest, the black-eyed child, and the mysterious woman who had saved them. When they awoke, it was late afternoon. They gathered in the inn's common room, where a warm fire crackled in the hearth, and shared their experiences, their voices hushed with awe and disbelief. They knew they would never forget their adventure in Cannock Chase. It was a story they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, a testament to the power of friendship, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring battle between light and darkness. As they prepared to leave the village and return to their own lives, they looked back at the forest, its silhouette dark against the setting sun. They knew that Cannock Chase held many secrets, mysteries that might never be fully understood. But they also knew that they had been touched by something extraordinary, something that had changed them forever. They left the village, their hearts filled with a mixture of gratitude and wonder, their steps carrying them towards a future where the memory of their encounter with the black-eyed child would forever serve as a reminder of the darkness that lurked in the shadows and the light that could always be found within. The Inanaki Tunnel. The humid air hung heavy with the smell of pine needles and damp earth as Kenji checked the map one last time. He was crouched beside a sputtering campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the faces of his companions. Beside him, Hannah shivered, pulling her thick sweater tighter around her. "Are you sure this is the right place, Kenji?" she asked, her voice laced with apprehension. "This whole area feels off." "Relax, Hannah," Kenji replied with a reassuring grin. "It's just an old tunnel. Besides, didn't you say you wanted to see something truly spooky on this trip?" Hannah, a folklore student from Kyoto, had been fascinated by the legends surrounding the Inanaki Tunnel ever since she was a child. But now, faced with the reality of the place, her academic curiosity was battling with a growing sense of dread. Their third companion, a towering American named Ben, chuckled. "Don't worry, Hannah. I've seen my share of spooky places back home. This is nothing." Ben, a seasoned traveler with a penchant for the paranormal, had joined their group at the last minute, drawn by the promise of experiencing a genuine Japanese ghost story. He was convinced that there was a logical explanation for every supernatural phenomenon, and he relished the challenge of debunking the myths. The fourth member of their group, a quiet and observant photographer named Yumi, remained silent, her camera clutched tightly in her hand. She was drawn to the Inanaki Tunnel not by the legends, but by the stark beauty of its decay, the way nature was slowly reclaiming this forgotten place. But even she couldn't deny the unsettling atmosphere that clung to the air like a shroud. As the night deepened, the flames of their campfire died down, leaving them shrouded in an oppressive darkness. They shared stories of their own encounters with the supernatural, each tale adding to the growing sense of unease. But it was the legend of the Inanaki Tunnel that dominated their conversation, its sinister presence looming over them like a malevolent spirit. The legend spoke of a place where reality blurred, where the laws of man held no power. Some whispered of a hidden village, a community lost to time, where ancient customs and unspeakable horrors still thrive. Kenji, a pragmatist at heart, dismissed these stories as mere folklore. But even he couldn't ignore the prickle of unease that danced along his spine. With the first hint of dawn, they packed their meager belongings and set off towards the tunnel. As they approached the gaping maw of the tunnel, its darkness seeming to devour the pale light of dawn, Hannah felt a wave of fear wash over her. Ben, however, was undeterred. He strode confidently towards the tunnel, his flashlight cutting a swathe through the gloom. "Let's see what all the fuss is about," he declared, his voice echoing in the stillness. Kenji and Yumi exchanged a nervous glance, but they followed close behind, drawn by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. As they ventured deeper into the tunnel, the temperature dropped, a damp coldness seeping into their bones. The walls were rough and uneven, and the floor was littered with debris. The only light came from their flashlights, their beams dancing and swirling in the swirling dust motes. "This place is seriously creepy," Ben muttered, his usual bravado faltering. "Just a bit further," Kenji replied, his voice echoing in the oppressive silence. But as they rounded a bend in the tunnel, their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. A collective gasp escaped their lips, and a wave of panic surged through them. "What the?" Hannah cried, fumbling for her phone. "No signal," Yumi said, her voice tight with fear. Kenji tried his flashlight again, but it was no use. The batteries were completely drained. They were trapped in the heart of the tunnel, surrounded by an impenetrable darkness that seemed to press in on them from all sides. And then they heard it, a faint sound at first, like the rustling of leaves, but it grew louder, closer, until it was a low growl that echoed through the tunnel. The four friends huddled together, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could feel the presence of something unseen, something malevolent, lurking in the darkness just beyond their reach. "What was that?" Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. The scream, high-pitched and filled with an unmistakable terror, echoed through the tunnel, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Hannah's blood ran cold. It was Ben's voice. "Ben!" she screamed, her voice raw with panic. "Ben, where are you?" But only the echo of her own voice answered her. The darkness pressed in on them, a suffocating blanket of fear. "We have to find him," Kenji said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. Yumi nodded, her face pale but resolute. She raised her camera, its flash providing a brief, strobe-like glimpse of their surroundings. But Ben was nowhere to be seen. They moved forward cautiously, their hands outstretched, feeling their way along the rough walls of the tunnel. The air was thick with a cloying, metallic scent that made their stomachs churn. Every few steps, they would call out Ben's name, but there was no response. Suddenly, Kenji stumbled, his foot catching on something on the tunnel floor. He cried out in surprise, his hand instinctively reaching out to steady himself. His fingers brushed against something cold and slick. Yumi quickly snapped another photo, the flash illuminating a horrifying sight. Ben lay sprawled on the ground, his eyes wide with terror, a gaping wound in his chest. Blood seeped from the wound, pooling on the rough ground beneath him. Hannah gasped, covering her mouth with her hand to stifle a scream. Kenji stared at the gruesome scene, his mind reeling. He had never seen anything like it. Ben, the boisterous, larger-than-life American, was dead. And then he saw them. Footprints in the dust, leading away from Ben's body. Footprints that were too large, too wide, with strange, elongated toes. Footprints that were definitely not human. A wave of primal fear washed over Kenji, a fear that transcended the horror of Ben's death. They were not alone in the tunnel. Something else was with them, something ancient and malevolent. He quickly urged Yumi to turn off her camera, plunging them back into darkness. He didn't want whatever had killed Ben to know they were still there. "We have to get out of here," he whispered, his voice urgent. Now, driven by a desperate need to escape, they stumbled forward, their fear propelling them onward. The darkness seemed to cling to them, the silence punctuated by their ragged breathing and the frantic beating of their hearts. And then, a glimmer of hope. A faint light appeared in the distance, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. They staggered towards it, their pace quickening with every step. As they drew closer, the light grew stronger, revealing the outline of an opening. They burst out of the tunnel and into the blinding sunlight, gasping for air as if they had been drowning. But their relief was short-lived. They found themselves in a clearing, surrounded by a dense, ancient forest. And in the center of the clearing, nestled amongst the trees, was a village. A village that seemed to be frozen in time, its buildings dilapidated and overgrown with weeds. A village that was eerily silent. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows of one of the houses. An old woman, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. She stared at them, a chilling smile spreading across her lips. "Welcome," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Welcome to Inanaki Village." The old woman's words hung in the air, a chilling welcome to a place that seemed to exist outside the realm of reality. Hana, Kenji, and Yumi stood frozen, their minds struggling to comprehend the scene before them. Inanaki Village, the name whispered in hushed tones, a place spoken of in legends and campfire stories, a place shrouded in mystery and fear. The village itself was a collection of dilapidated wooden houses, their roofs sagging, their walls covered in moss and creeping vines. A thick silence hung over the village, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional caw of a crow. It felt abandoned, yet there was an undeniable sense of something lurking beneath the surface, something watchful and malevolent. The old woman beckoned them forward with a skeletal finger. "Come," she croaked. "The village awaits." Hesitantly, they followed her, their footsteps echoing on the uneven stone path. They passed houses with boarded-up windows and crumbling doorways, their interiors shrouded in darkness. A sense of dread clung to them, a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. The old woman led them to a large building in the center of the village. It was larger than the other houses, its wooden facade adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering sunlight. This, the old woman explained, was the community center, where the villagers gathered for meals and ceremonies. As they stepped inside, a wave of nausea washed over them. The air was thick with the smell of decay and incense, and the dim light revealed a scene that sent shivers down their spines. The walls were lined with grotesque masks, their expressions frozen in a rictus of pain and terror. Strange symbols were painted on the floor, and in the center of the room was a stone altar, stained with what looked like dried blood. "What is this place?" Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible. The old woman's smile widened, revealing a set of yellowed teeth. "This is where we honor our traditions," she replied. "Traditions that have been passed down for generations." Kenji felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He had heard rumors about the rituals practiced in Inanaki Village, rituals that involved blood sacrifices and ancient, forbidden magic. He exchanged a worried look with Yumi, who seemed equally disturbed. The old woman clapped her hands, and a group of villagers emerged from the shadows. They were dressed in ragged clothes, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks. They moved with an unnatural grace, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "We have been expecting you," the old woman said, her voice taking on a sinister tone. "The village needs fresh blood." The villagers closed in, their movements predatory, their intentions clear. Kenji, Hannah, and Yumi knew that they were in grave danger. They had stumbled into a nightmare from which there might be no escape. The villagers advanced, their masks leering, their movements predatory. Hana, Kinji, and Yumi instinctively huddled together, a small island of fear in a sea of masked faces. They were outnumbered, trapped in the heart of a village that seemed to operate by its own twisted rules. Kinji, his heart pounding in his chest, knew they had to act fast. He grabbed a loose piece of wood from the floor, brandishing it as a makeshift weapon. "Stay back," he yelled, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We don't want any trouble." But the villagers were undeterred. They continued to close in, their eyes gleaming with a fanatic intensity. One of them lunged at Kinji, a rusty knife glinting in his hand. Kinji reacted instinctively, swinging the piece of wood and connecting with the villager's arm. The villager cried out in pain, dropping the knife. The sight of their comrade injured seemed to enrage the other villagers. They surged forward, a wave of bodies and grotesque masks. Kinji, Hana, and Yumi fought back desperately, but they were no match for the sheer number of their attackers. Yumi, her camera forgotten, lashed out with her fists and feet, landing a few solid blows. But she was quickly overwhelmed, dragged to the ground by several villagers. Hana, her eyes wide with terror, tried to fight them off, but she was easily overpowered. Kinji, seeing his friends captured, felt a surge of desperation. He fought with a ferocity born of fear and adrenaline, but it was a losing battle. He was knocked to the ground, his head striking the stone floor with a sickening thud. As his vision blurred, he saw the old woman approaching, her face a mask of triumph. "The ritual will begin," she cackled, her voice filled with a chilling glee. "The village will be reborn." They were dragged to the altar, their struggles futile against the strength of their captors. The villagers chanted in a language that sounded ancient and malevolent, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. Hana, her body trembling with fear, caught Kinji's eye. He saw a reflection of his own terror in her gaze, a shared understanding of their impending doom. The old woman raised her arms, a ceremonial dagger glinting in her hand. "The offering is prepared," she proclaimed. "Let the blood flow." The old woman raised the ceremonial dagger high above her head, its blade catching the dim light. Hana squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face. Kinji, despite his fear, felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him. He had accepted his fate. But just as the old woman was about to bring the dagger down, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a human scream. It was something primal, something feral, filled with an unimaginable pain and rage. The villagers froze, their chanting abruptly silenced. They turned towards the source of the scream, their eyes wide with fear. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form contorted and grotesque. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was pale and translucent, its limbs elongated and twisted. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green light, and its mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. The creature lunged at the villagers, its claws slashing through the air. Panic erupted as the villagers scattered, their carefully orchestrated ritual descending into chaos. The creature moved with an unnatural speed, its attacks swift and brutal. Blood splattered across the floor as villagers fell, their screams mingling with the creature's terrifying roars. Kinji, Hana, and Yumi, forgotten in the midst of the carnage, watched in stunned disbelief. This was something beyond their comprehension, a nightmare come to life. The old woman, her face contorted with rage, screamed at the creature, but her words were lost in the din. She tried to attack it with her dagger, but the creature swatted her aside like a fly. She fell to the ground, her body broken and lifeless. The creature continued its rampage, tearing through the villagers with terrifying efficiency. Within minutes, the chamber was littered with bodies, the air thick with the smell of blood and fear. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished. Silence descended once more, broken only by the moans of the injured and dying. Kenji, Hannah, and Yumi, their bodies trembling with shock, slowly rose to their feet. They looked around at the carnage, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. They were free, but at what cost? The silence in the aftermath of the carnage was deafening. The air was heavy with the stench of blood and the weight of death. Kenji, Hannah, and Yumi stood amidst the carnage, their bodies trembling, their minds reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. But amidst the shock and grief, a primal instinct for survival kicked in. They knew they couldn't stay in that cursed place, not even for a moment longer. They cautiously made their way through the village, avoiding the scattered bodies and the pools of blood. The houses, once menacing, now seemed empty and lifeless. The eerie silence was broken only by the sound of their own footsteps and the rustling of the wind. As they reached the edge of the village, they looked back at the community center, the scene of their near sacrifice. The silence emanating from the building was more chilling than any scream. What had happened there? What was that creature? These questions lingered in their minds, unanswered and unsettling. They entered the forest, its dense foliage offering a sense of concealment. They moved quickly, driven by a desperate need to escape the confines of Inanaki village. The forest seemed to press in on them, its shadows filled with unseen dangers. But they pressed on, their fear fueling their determination. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled upon a narrow path. It was overgrown and barely discernible, but it offered a glimmer of hope. They followed the path, their pace quickening with every step. The path led them through the forest, winding its way through dense thickets and across babbling brooks. The further they traveled, the more the oppressive atmosphere of the village seemed to dissipate, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest. As dusk approached, they emerged from the forest, blinking in the fading light. They found themselves on a dirt road, a sign of civilization that filled them with relief. They followed the road, their footsteps echoing in the twilight. Eventually, they reached a small town, its lights twinkling in the distance. They walked towards the town, their hearts filled with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. They had survived. They found a small inn and collapsed into bed, their bodies and minds exhausted. They slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of the village and the creature. The next morning, they boarded a bus, leaving the town and the horrors of Inanaki village behind them. They didn't speak much during the journey, each lost in their own thoughts. They had shared an experience that would forever bind them together, a terrifying secret that they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. As the bus pulled away, they looked back at the receding landscape, a sense of finality washing over them. Inanaki village, with its dark secrets and ancient rituals, remained shrouded in mystery. But they knew one thing for sure. They would never forget the horrors they had witnessed, the terror they had endured, and the friends they had lost. The Inanaki Tunnel and its secrets remained, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of the world, a darkness that waits to be unleashed. Mysteries beneath the ocean. The rusted hulk of the salvage vessel, the Charybdis, groaned and shuddered against the relentless assault of the Atlantic waves. Salt spray lashed the deck, the wind howling a mournful dirge that seemed to echo the apprehension churning in the guts of the 4 souls aboard. At the helm stood Captain Rex Riptide Riley, a man who looked like he'd been carved from driftwood and whiskey. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a depth of experience that spoke of countless battles with the ocean and the scars to prove it. Riley had a reputation, part daredevil, part pirate, all business when it came to the treacherous depths. He wasn't a man to be trifled with, and the tension radiating off him was as thick as the fog rolling in. His crew, however, was another story. Dr. Julian Frost, the expedition leader, was a marine archaeologist with a haunted past. Years ago, a dive gone wrong had claimed the lives of his team, leaving him with a survivor's guilt that gnawed at his soul and fueled his reckless pursuit of the unknown. Frost, with his sharp jawline and the haunted look in his eyes, was a man on the edge, driven by a need to prove himself, to conquer his demons, or perhaps to find his own watery grave. His second in command, Dr. Anya Sharma, was a whirlwind of nervous energy. A brilliant oceanographer with a thirst for discovery, she masked her anxieties with a forced bravado that fooled no one, least of all herself. Anya was trapped between her desire to explore the mysteries of the deep and a primal fear of the crushing darkness that awaited them below. The final member of their crew was Cole, a hardened salvage diver with a reputation for pushing the limits. Muscles rippled beneath his faded tattoos, each one a testament to a close call in the murky depths. Cole was a man of few words, his gaze as cold and unforgiving as the abyss they were about to plunge into. He had his own reasons for being there, a score to settle, a ghost to lay to rest in the watery graveyard below. Their destination, the Nwadibu Bay, a desolate stretch of the Mauritanian coast notorious for its shipwrecks. Hundreds of vessels, from ancient galleons to modern freighters, lay scattered across the seabed, their skeletal remains a grim testament to the ocean's unforgiving power. Local legends whispered of restless spirits, of ancient curses, and of monstrous creatures lurking in the shadows. As night fell, casting a pall over the churning waters, the Charybdis reached the edge of the graveyard. The sonar pulsed with eerie images of the submerged wrecks, a tangled mess of metal and shadow, a decaying metropolis of the drowned. The crew prepped their gear, the metallic clang of tanks and regulators a jarring counterpoint to the rising wind. Frost, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity, double-checked his equipment, his movements betraying a barely contained tremor. Anya, pale and tight-lipped, fought to control her breathing, her gaze darting nervously towards the black water. Riley, sensing their fear, barked a gruff order, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. And Cole, his face in a motionless mask, stood at the edge of the deck, his eyes fixed on the churning abyss, as if challenging the darkness to swallow him whole. With a final hiss of escaping air, they plunged into the icy depths. The world above, with its fleeting warmth and fading light, vanished behind a wall of impenetrable black. The deeper they descended, the colder and more oppressive it became, the pressure a tangible force against their bodies. The ghostly shapes of the shipwrecks materialized from the gloom, their skeletal forms looming like specters in a watery underworld. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rasp of their own breathing and the eerie creaks and groans of the decaying vessels. The beams of their dive lights cut through the murky water, revealing fleeting glimpses of rusted hulls, shattered masts, and gaping holes that seemed to stare back at them like empty sockets. Anya shuddered, her fear a living thing that coiled around her heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes followed their every move. As they navigated the labyrinth of wreckage, a low, guttural moan echoed through the water, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the drowned ships. It resonated through their bodies, a primal vibration that set their teeth on edge. Frost, his obsession overriding his caution, pressed on, drawn towards the source of the unsettling sound. Even Riley, hardened by years at sea, felt a chill crawl down his spine. This place was wrong, unnatural. The moan grew louder, pulling them deeper into the heart of the graveyard. They reached a clearing, the seabed dominated by the colossal remains of a once majestic ocean liner, its hull split open like a gutted whale. The moan was almost deafening now, a pulsating drone that seemed to vibrate the very water around them. And then they saw it. Lodged within the wreckage of the liner, bathed in an unnatural green luminescence, was a massive, barnacle-encrusted object. It pulsed with an eerie light, its surface covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift before their eyes. As they approached, the moaning intensified, and the symbols began to glow with an infernal light. The water itself seemed to warp and distort around the object, as if reality itself was bending to its will. Frost, mesmerized, reached out a gloved hand towards the pulsing object. But before he could touch it, a blinding flash of light erupted, throwing them back against the wreckage. The flash subsided, leaving them reeling in a disoriented darkness, the echoes of the explosion ringing in their ears. As their vision returned, they found themselves amidst a scene of utter chaos. The once stable graveyard of ships was now a maelstrom of churning water and debris, the wrecked vessels groaning and shifting as if in agonizing pain. Frost, his head pounding, frantically searched for his team. Anya was gone, swept away by the violent current. Cole, his usual stoicism shattered, clung to a mangled piece of wreckage, his eyes wide with a primal fear Frost had never seen in the hardened diver. Riley, ever the captain, was battling the current, his powerful arms pulling him towards a more stable section of the wreckage. "Anya!" Frost screamed, his voice barely audible above the roaring water and the groaning metal. He saw a flicker of her dive light in the distance, a desperate beacon in the swirling darkness. He kicked against the current, his body protesting, his lungs burning. He had to reach her, to save her. The guilt from his past failures surged within him, a suffocating wave of responsibility. Suddenly, a shape emerged from the gloom, a monstrous silhouette illuminated by the scattered beams of their dive lights. It was a creature straight out of a nightmare, a leviathan that defied all known marine biology. Its skin was a grotesque mosaic of scales and barnacles, its eyes burning with an unholy yellow light. Massive tentacles, thicker than any anaconda, writhed around its body, their suckers pulsing with an obscene hunger. The creature unleashed a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the ocean. Cole, his grip faltering, lost his hold and was swept away by the surge, his terrified scream lost in the monstrous bellow. Frost, his blood running cold, watched in horror as the creature descended upon Cole, its tentacles wrapping around him with terrifying speed. He could see the panic in Cole's eyes, the desperate struggle against the inevitable, before he was pulled into the creature's gaping maw. Riley, having secured himself to a sturdy piece of wreckage, witnessed the gruesome scene. He knew they had no time to grieve, no time to hesitate. "Frost!" he roared, his voice barely cutting through the chaos. "We have to get out of here. Now!" They fought their way through the churning water, the creature's tentacles lashing out like whips, narrowly missing them. They navigated the maze of wreckage, the groaning metal and the creature's enraged roars creating a symphony of terror. They reached a narrow passage, the wreckage forming a treacherous tunnel. Riley, his face grim, pushed Frost through first, his own bulk barely squeezing through the mangled metal. They emerged into a larger chamber, the water slightly calmer, but their relief was short-lived. The creature, its massive form filling the passage, was right behind them. Riley, his eyes hardening with a desperate resolve, drew his dive knife. "We have to fight it, Frost," he yelled. "It's our only goddamn chance." Frost, his mind reeling, drew his own knife, the cold steel a meager comfort against the monstrous reality before him. The creature lunged, its tentacles a blur of motion. Riley, with surprising agility, dodged the attack, his knife slashing out. He managed to sever one of the tentacles, the creature screeching in pain, its yellow eyes burning with fury. But it was a losing battle. The creature was too powerful, its tentacles too numerous. It grabbed Riley, its suckers latching onto his dive suit with terrifying strength. Riley struggled, his knife a desperate flash of defiance, but the creature's grip was unrelenting. Frost, his heart pounding in his chest, watched helplessly as Riley was pulled towards the creature's gaping maw, his final, defiant roar swallowed by the abyss. He was alone now, the sole survivor of the doomed expedition. A wave of nausea washed over him, the weight of his failure crushing him. He turned and fled, his mind screaming, his lungs burning. He had to get out, had to escape the nightmare. But the graveyard seemed to stretch endlessly before him, a labyrinth of death with no escape. Frost swam blindly, his lungs screaming for air, his limbs heavy with exhaustion and terror. The creature's roars echoed behind him, a relentless pursuit that pushed him to the brink of madness. He was lost in a maze of death, surrounded by the ghosts of drowned sailors and the chilling presence of the monstrous Leviathan. He stumbled upon a cavernous opening in the wreckage, a gaping maw that seemed to beckon him into the deeper darkness. Driven by a desperate hope and a primal instinct to survive, he plunged into the abyss, his dive light barely penetrating the inky blackness. He descended into a world of utter silence, the creature's roars fading into the distance. The water grew colder, the pressure increasing with every foot of depth. He felt a growing sense of unease, a primal fear that clawed at his sanity. He was alone in the abyss, surrounded by an unseen presence that seemed to watch him, to mock his feeble attempts to escape. His dive light flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the cavern walls. He saw strange shapes, bioluminescent creatures that pulsed with an eerie light, their forms alien and unsettling. He felt a growing sense of disorientation, his mind playing tricks on him, his senses overloaded. He saw visions, faces of the drowned, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. Ghosts of the graveyard, reaching out to him, their touch cold and clammy. He saw Anya, her face pale, her eyes filled with fear, her hand outstretched towards him. He reached for her, his fingers closing on empty water. He was losing his mind, the pressure and the isolation crushing his sanity. He felt a growing urge to surrender, to let the darkness consume him, to join the ghosts of the graveyard in their eternal slumber. But then, a new vision appeared, a vision of light, of warmth, of hope. He saw a shimmering portal, a gateway to another realm. He saw Ava, her face serene, her eyes filled with peace. She beckoned to him, her voice a soothing whisper in the darkness. He swam towards the portal, his body filled with a newfound strength. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the shimmering surface. He felt a surge of energy, a sense of transcendence. He was leaving the darkness behind, entering a realm of light and peace. He closed his eyes, embracing the unknown. He woke with a gasp, his body racked with pain, his lungs burning. He was lying on a sandy beach, the sun warm on his skin. He sat up, his head throbbing, his vision blurry. He looked around, his eyes searching for the familiar landmarks of the graveyard. But he was no longer in the Nwadibu Bay. He was on a small island, surrounded by crystal-clear water and lush vegetation. He was alone. He stumbled to his feet, his legs shaky. He looked out at the ocean, its surface shimmering in the sunlight. He couldn't understand what had happened, how he had escaped the graveyard, how he had survived. He saw a figure approaching him, a woman with long, flowing hair and eyes that sparkled like the sea. She smiled at him, her voice a melody that calmed his troubled soul. "Welcome," she said. "You are safe now." He looked at her, his eyes filled with questions. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am the guardian of this island," she said. "I have been watching over you." "But how did I get here?" he asked. "What happened to the others?" The woman's smile faded. "The others are gone," she said. "They were consumed by the darkness. But I saw Anya," he said. "She was alive." "She is trapped," the woman said. "Trapped between worlds." "We have to save her," he said. The woman shook her head. "It is too dangerous," she said. "The creature guards the gateway." "I don't care," he said. "I have to try." The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness. "You are a brave soul," she said, "but you are not strong enough." "I will find a way," he said. "I will not leave her behind." The woman sighed. "Very well," she said. "I will help you, but you must be prepared for what awaits you." "I am," he said. The woman led him to a hidden cave, where a small boat was moored. "This will take you to the gateway," she said. "But be warned, the journey is perilous." He nodded, his determination unwavering. He climbed into the boat and set off, his heart filled with hope and fear. He was going back to the graveyard, back to the creature, back to the darkness. But this time, he was not alone. He had the Guardian's blessing, and he had the memory of Anya to guide him. He would save her, or he would die trying. The Wandering Light. The small town of Cedar Creek nestled deep in the Oregon wilderness, a place where ancient pines clawed at the sky and mist clung to the earth like a shroud. The air itself hummed with a quiet energy, a sense of secrets kept and stories whispered on the wind. It was a town steeped in shadow, both literally and figuratively. Alice, a young journalist with fire in her eyes and a hunger for truth, arrived in Cedar Creek with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had heard the whispers, the legends of the wandering light that haunted the woods, a spectral orb that lured the curious to their doom. While others saw superstition, Alice saw a story. She craved the kind of story that would make her name, that would prove her mettle in the cutthroat world of journalism. Cedar Creek, however, seemed determined to keep its secrets close. The townsfolk were a tight-lipped bunch, their eyes filled with a wary knowledge that sent shivers down Alice's spine. Joe, the weathered park ranger with his calloused hands and the scent of pine needles clinging to his clothes, warned her in a gruff voice. "Some things are best left undisturbed, Mississippi. The woods hold secrets that ain't meant for our kind." But Alice was not easily deterred. She saw the fear in Joe's eyes, the way his gaze darted towards the darkening woods, as if expecting some unseen horror to emerge. It only fueled her curiosity further. She sought out Clara, a teenage girl with haunted eyes and a strange air of knowing, who seemed to hold the key to the town's mysteries. "The light, it's always there," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Waiting. And when it calls your name, you can't resist." Alice felt a thrill course through her veins. This wasn't just folklore. There was a real fear here, a tangible darkness that clung to the town like cobwebs. This was the story she had been searching for. As dusk settled over Cedar Creek, casting long shadows that danced like phantoms, Alice found herself drawn to the window of her small room at the local inn. The woods beckoned, their secrets whispering on the wind. And there, through the veil of mist and the skeletal branches of the pines, she saw it, the wandering light. A shimmering orb, pulsing with an eerie luminescence, it seemed to beckon her, to promise answers that lay hidden in the heart of the darkness. Alice knew the risks. She had heard the stories, the warnings, but the journalist in her, the relentless pursuit of truth, wouldn't let her back down. With a deep breath and a pounding heart, she grabbed her camera, her notebook, and stepped out into the night. The woods were alive with unseen things, rustling in the undergrowth, whispering in the canopy above. Each snap of a twig, each hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. But Alice pressed on, the lure of the light drawing her deeper and deeper into the heart of the unknown. Part 2. Shadows of the Past. The deeper Alice ventured into the woods, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The pines seemed to close ranks above her, their branches intertwining to blot out the moon and stars, leaving her in a world of swirling mist and suffocating darkness. The wandering light, however, remained a constant, a beacon in the gloom that pulsed with an unnatural energy. Fear gnawed at her, a primal instinct screaming at her to turn back, to flee the encroaching darkness. But there was something else, too, a fierce curiosity that battled with the fear, urging her forward, whispering promises of discovery. This was the essence of Alice, the journalist, the adventurer. The unwavering need to know, to understand, even in the face of the unknown. As she navigated the treacherous terrain, her boots sinking into the damp earth, she noticed a faint trail, barely discernible beneath the fallen leaves and tangled undergrowth. It seemed to wind its way towards the source of the light, a path trodden by others who had been drawn into the wood's embrace. Following the trail, Alice stumbled upon a small clearing, a pocket of eerie stillness in the heart of the restless forest. And there, nestled beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, lay a weathered leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, Alice opened the journal, its pages brittle with age. The faded ink spoke of a family who had lived in Cedar Creek generations ago, their words filled with a growing dread of the light that haunted their nights. The entries chronicled their descent into fear, their desperate attempts to escape the light's pull, and their final, chilling realization that resistance was futile. The light, it calls to us. It whispers promises of wonder, of knowledge beyond our comprehension. But there's a darkness in its heart, a hunger that cannot be sated. Alice's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just a legend, a ghost story told to frighten children. This was a documented account, a chilling testament to the light's power. As she delved deeper into the journal, a name leaped out at her: Clara. It was the same name as the enigmatic girl in town. Could this be her family? Had the light haunted this place for generations, claiming victims from the same bloodline? Closing the journal, Alice felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The woods seemed to spin, the trees swaying like drunken giants. She looked up to see the wandering light hovering closer than before, its glow intensified, as if feeding on her fear. A voice, barely audible above the rustling leaves, whispered her name. Alice. Panic seized her. She scrambled to her feet, the journal clutched tightly in her hand, and fled back the way she had come, the whispers chasing her through the darkness. Part 3. Revelations in the Firelight. Alice burst out of the woods, gasping for breath, the journal still clutched in her hand. She stumbled back to the sanctuary of her room at the inn, locking the door behind her as if to bar the darkness from entering. But the shadows followed her, clinging to the edges of her vision, whispering her name. She sank onto the bed, her body trembling, her mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. The journal lay open on her lap, the words of the past a stark warning of the dangers that lurked in the woods. But amidst the terror, there was a spark of defiance, a refusal to be consumed by the darkness. Alice was a journalist, and she wouldn't let fear silence her. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Driven by a new sense of urgency, Alice sought out Clara. She found the girl sitting by the window of her small cottage, her gaze fixed on the woods as if lost in a trance. Alice wasted no time on pleasantries. "I know about the journal," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know about your family." Clara's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with a flicker of fear. "You shouldn't have gone into the woods," she whispered, her voice filled with a chilling certainty. "You shouldn't have seen the light." "Tell me everything," Alice demanded, her voice firm. "Tell me about the light, about your family, about everything." Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering between Alice and the darkening woods. Finally, with a deep sigh, she began to speak, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire in the hearth. "The light, it's not what you think. It's not a ghost or a spirit or some natural phenomenon. It's something older, something that's been here since before the town, before the people. It lives in the woods, feeding on the lost, the curious, the ones who yearn for something more." Clara's words painted a picture of an ancient entity, a being of immense power that had woven itself into the fabric of the woods, its existence intertwined with the very history of Cedar Creek. It lured people with promises of wonder, of knowledge, of escape from their mundane lives. But the price was steep, a soul for a glimpse of the beyond. "My family, they were drawn to the light, just like everyone else," Clara continued, her voice thick with emotion. "They thought it could give them something they were missing. But it took everything." Clara recounted the night the light had come for her family, how it had lured them into the woods with promises of a better life, a world beyond their wildest dreams. She had been just a child then, hidden in the shadows, watching in horror as her parents and siblings were consumed by the light, their screams echoing through the trees. "I was the only one who escaped," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I was changed. The light marked me, bound me to it. I can feel its presence, its hunger. And I know it will come for me one day. Alice listened, her heart aching for Clara's loss, her mind reeling from the implications of her story. The wandering light wasn't just a legend. It was a predator, a malevolent force that preyed on human souls. And now, it had set its sights on her. A wave of fear washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. She wouldn't let the light win. She wouldn't become another victim, another lost soul consumed by the darkness. She would fight back, expose the truth, and break the cycle of fear that had gripped Cedar Creek for generations. But how? The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls of Clara's cottage. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and sending shivers down Alice's spine. But the storm raging outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within her. Clara's revelations had shaken her to the core. The wandering light wasn't just a supernatural phenomenon. It was a malevolent entity, a predator that had haunted Cedar Creek for centuries. And now, it had set its sights on her. Fear warred with determination in Alice's heart. She knew the dangers, the risks she faced, but she couldn't back down now. She had come to Cedar Creek seeking a story, and she had found one that was far more profound and far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. "We have to stop it," Alice said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Clara looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. "But how?" she whispered. "No one has ever been able to stop it before." "There has to be a way," Alice insisted. "There has to be something we can do." They spent the rest of the night poring over the journal, searching for clues, for any hint of weakness in the light's armor. They found nothing. The journal was a chronicle of despair, a testament to the light's power and the futility of resistance. As dawn approached, casting a pale light through the windows, Alice knew she had to make a decision. She couldn't hide in the cottage forever. The light was out there, waiting, and it wouldn't be denied. "I'm going back to the woods," she said, her voice resolute. Clara gasped. "No, you can't. It's too dangerous." "I have to," Alice said. "I have to face it." She grabbed her camera, her notebook, and the journal. She kissed Clara on the cheek, a silent promise to return, and stepped out into the cold morning air. The woods were eerily quiet, the wind having died down with the coming of dawn. But the silence was deceptive, a mask for the darkness that lurked beneath the trees. Alice could feel it watching her, its presence a weight on her shoulders. She followed the familiar path, her heart pounding in her chest. The closer she got to the clearing, the stronger the light's presence became. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. And then, she saw it. The wandering light hovered in the center of the clearing, its glow intensified, its pulsating energy filling the air. It was no longer a distant orb, a shimmering beacon in the darkness. It was a presence, a being of immense power, its malevolence palpable. Alice raised her camera, her finger hovering over the shutter button. This was it. This was the moment of truth. As she focused the lens, the light began to change. It shimmered, distorted, and then coalesced into a horrifying figure, its eyes burning with an unholy fire, its voice a chorus of whispers, the echoes of countless souls consumed by the darkness. Alice gasped, her finger instinctively pressing the shutter button. The camera flashed, capturing the image of the entity in all its terrifying glory. The light roared, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. It lunged towards Alice, its claws outstretched, its eyes burning with a hunger that could never be sated. Alice screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony of the woods. She stumbled back, her foot catching on a root, sending her sprawling to the ground. The light descended upon her, its shadow engulfing her, its whispers filling her mind. And then, darkness. The search parties combed the woods for days, but no trace of Alice was ever found. Her disappearance became another whispered legend in Cedar Creek, a cautionary tale of the dangers of curiosity and the price of seeking the truth. Joe, the grizzled park ranger, led the search efforts, his heart heavy with guilt and regret. He had warned her, tried to protect her from the darkness that lurked in the woods. But Alice, with her unwavering determination and thirst for knowledge, had ventured too far, crossed the line that separated the known from the unknown. Clara, haunted by the loss of another friend to the light, retreated further into herself, her silence a testament to the deep scars left by the tragedy. She wandered the woods, her eyes searching the shadows, her ears attuned to the whispers on the wind, hoping for any sign, any clue that might lead her to Alice. One day, deep in the heart of the woods, Clara stumbled upon a small clearing. It was the same clearing where Alice had found the journal, the place where she had last seen the wandering light. But something was different. In the center of the clearing, nestled beneath the roots of the ancient oak, lay Alice's camera. It was battered and scratched, but miraculously intact. With trembling hands, Clara picked up the camera and pressed the playback button. The screen flickered to life, revealing the last images captured by Alice before her disappearance. There was the clearing, bathed in the eerie glow of the wandering light. And then, the entity itself, its form shimmering, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. And finally, a glimpse of Alice, her face contorted in terror, her hand reaching out as if to ward off the encroaching darkness. Clara watched the images in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. But as the video ended, she noticed something else. A faint figure, barely visible in the background, standing behind the entity. It was Alice, but she was different. Her eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the entity, her form shimmering, her expression serene. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Alice hadn't been consumed by the light. She had become a part of it. The camera slipped from Clara's grasp, falling to the ground with a soft thud. She turned and fled the clearing. The image of Alice's transformed face burned into her memory. As she ran, she could hear the whispers on the wind, the voices of the lost, the curious, the ones who had been consumed by the light. And now, Alice's voice joined the chorus, her laughter echoing through the trees, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world. Clara didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the woods. She looked back, her eyes filled with fear and sorrow. The wandering light was still there, its glow illuminating the night sky, its whispers beckoning the next victim. But Clara would not be drawn back into the darkness. She had seen too much, lost too much. She would carry the burden of her knowledge, the memory of Alice's fate, and warn others of the dangers that lurked in the woods. The wandering light would continue to haunt Cedar Creek, its hunger never sated. But Clara would be its witness, its guardian, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the light, Alice would remain, her soul forever bound to the entity, her laughter echoing through the trees, a chilling reminder of the price of curiosity and the enduring power of the unknown. And so, the tale ends, leaving a lingering chill even as the rain outside begins to soften. But remember, every shadow holds a story, and every whisper on the wind might be a ghostly echo. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into the unknown, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the Rainy Night Storyteller for more tales of mystery and horror. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be undisturbed.